Welcome to the Classic Cinema Society podcast. Oh, hey, look, it's the Capitol Dome. I'm your host, Christopher Pistol. Every episode, I bring on a guest and discuss a classic movie, and we talk about its place in cinema history and how it holds up today. Today, we're talking about Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is a significant picture. It is significant because it emphasizes democracy in action. I consider it a real privilege and a real experience to have played even a minor part under the distinguished direction of Frank Capra.
All right, well, this film was chosen by Kale Anderson, the first guest on this podcast who has also been in my wedding.
Amen to that.
Kale, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Just excited to have been able to watch this movie in light of the current political climate.
Oh, I've said before, like how, I watch movies in some way to escape, but then inevitably, even movies from nearly 100 years ago end up making me think about things that are going on today. And I don't think another movie has been as true as this one.
No, it really hasn't. This one, I think it should at this point be mandatory watching in public forums.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely like a movie that some people watch in high school. It probably goes over their heads, though. If I'm being honest, I don't know if I fully like took in everything when I first saw this. I think I saw this in college, but I don't even know if I fully took everything in. But yeah, maybe it should be mandatory.
Yeah, I definitely didn't take it all in the first time I watched it in college.
Well, before we go too deep into the movie, Kale, let's tell
Yes.
us a little bit about yourself and your film journey.
So I grew up being a nerd, just for various things, and film was one of them. In college, my first major before I changed it 2 years in was film production because I had gotten to make a film as part of a project in high school and loved the concept and the idea. And then took a bunch of film classes and realized that the actual making of the film is much more a hobby than uh, something I wanted to do long term, particularly the sitting in the film lab for hours on end waiting for things to render. Um, but as part of my film studies, I would say actually probably a significant portion, I did all of the film history and classical film theory and all of that stuff before I actually got into a majority of the film, the practical side of things. So I got to watch all kinds of fun things like Battleship Potemkin and Ivan the Terrible.
Family fare.
Yes, yeah,
Your typical popcorn cinema.
some good quality, nice Saturday morning cartoon style Soviet era propaganda films. Um, and yeah, I love it. I love watching movies. I still watch movies all the time. And to me, they're one of the, I don't want to say greatest art forms, but they're one of the art forms that I've connected with the most because of, I guess, like the ability to storytell in a very immersive way, and kind of the limitations that go with that storytelling, the challenge that can come with telling a good story in that hour and a half I guess maybe 4 hours, depending on if you're watching Gone with the Wind or not. um, but just kind of the time constraints, the you know acting ability, the writing, everything that has to happen for a film to be pulled off well. I love, and I think it's probably my favorite art form after music.
Me too. In fact, I'll go a step further than you would, and I'll say it is the greatest art form, definitely of the 20th century. And I can say that, or else I would have a painting podcast. I don't have an old movie podcast, but anyway, yeah, that's funny that you kind of got into film and then kind of like realized you maybe enjoy like the artistic or appreciation side of it more so. I can feel the pain on the whole rendering thing. I think the only reason I got back into doing film production and video editing, I took like several years off after college, is because of that whole rendering thing, which has been significantly, fixed pretty much. You pretty much don't have to wait any time at all to render anything out or to export a video anymore, which is lovely.
uh,
More specifically, what's your kind of relationship with older movies? Like, do you watch old movies? Did you always used to watch old movies?
yes and no. There are obviously like the childhood movies that we all grow up on. Your old Disney movies, Snow White, Robin Hood, those things, and then like Bedknobs and Broomsticks, and just really anything with like Dick Van Dyke or whatever else. Old musicals like Singing in the Rain was probably a lot more of my exposure growing up than just like general classic films. But I've definitely learned to appreciate them as I've gotten older, especially since I'm a lawyer and anthropologist by training, particular like with religion. But I love the concept of a film in its context. So it's a
Mm.
reflection of and commentary on the society in which it exists, the time period in which it exists. For me, part of watching old films is learning some of the history behind it, um, knowing about what was going on in the world that this film, the makers felt like it needed to be made, whether it was for just entertainment purposes, whether it was for propaganda, like the Soviet era propaganda films, whatever else. And so that's mostly my relationship now, is that I appreciate films as a reflection and commentary on their context.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, that's probably the one main thing that drew me into cinema history, was just the fact that you can learn so much about the history of the world through the history of movies. And it's also a very difficult thing too, especially when you're teaching a film appreciation class to a bunch of young people, to try to, get them to, take a movie in its own terms, to accept a movie in its historical context. I think we'll talk probably a little bit more about historical context when we get into Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. So, when did you first see this movie, and kind of what was your reaction to it?
I watched it the first time in college, in undergrad. A really good friend of mine who is much more of a fan of classic movies at the time, he had grandparents that were much more involved in his life than I did. And so he was a lot more exposed to classic films. And this was, and still is, one of his favorite films. And so I was just hanging out with him one day and he's like, let's watch this movie. That was the only other time I watched this movie besides in preparation for this podcast. And it left that much of an impact on me that, almost 20 years ago, this movie that I watched one time is just stuck in my head. Yeah, it's been a long time since I watched it, and I'm glad to have been able to pick it back up.
All you people don't know about lost causes. Mr. Payne does. He said once they were the only causes worth fighting for. And he fought for them once. For the only reason any man ever fights for them. Because of just one plain, simple rule. Love thy neighbor.
So I went back and I actually looked at the kind of like Academy Awards list, because historically 1939 is a very big year for movies. It's kind of typically referred to as like Hollywood's greatest year. You've got Stagecoach, you've got The Wizard of Oz, you've got Gone with the Wind. And looking at the Academy Awards, like, obviously like Gone with the Wind like strongly dominated the awards for this year. But Mr. Smith did get, I think, 2 nominations. One was for screenplay. One. I think it only got 1 win, which was screenplay. But Jimmy Stewart was nominated for Best Actor. Did not win, but was nominated, which is kind of amazing to think back on. I think the winner was for a film called Goodbye, Mr. Chips, which I have never seen, but I don't think a lot of people
Yeah.
have either.
Honestly, that is kind of crazy because like his acting in this is just immaculate.
Yeah, I mean he's playing this sort of very young. I mean he's very young in the film. This was one of his first like breakout performances. He was in like a sequel to The Thin Man. This was kind of his first big like dramatic film role that really like made him kind of a household name after this. But yeah, he's so fantastic, and I think he's so sincere, and that's really kind of like what kind of becomes Jimmy Stewart's bread and butter, kind of what he is known for, are these very sincere, like really heart wrenching and gut churning performances. And in the last like 10 minutes of this film, you just like you completely like breaks your heart. And this is a film that is, like I said, like creeping up on nearly 100 years old, and it does not feel corny in any way, at least not from Jimmy Stewart. I feel like in the last bit of this film where he is really laying his heart out on the table.
Jimmy Stewart and Frank Capra, by and large, a winning combination.
Indeed.
His acting definitely makes it. This film is kind of described as like a comedy drama, a dramedy,
Hmm.
um, and there are a couple of comedic parts aside from him that are just kind of from the time. Lots of jokes about drinking and that kind of thing, but by and large, it's his like physical acting and his ability to really encapsulate the kind of country bumpkin that provides the comedy elements to this movie.
Hmm.
There's, I mean, aside from that, it's kind of a heavy subject by and large. It's all about political corruption and railroading and scapegoating a particular person, and and then it's him, and he's just bringing, he's fumbling his hat constantly while talking to a beautiful woman, and just disappears on them for a while, and is able to just be the wide-eyed rube
Yeah.
in Washington so well.
I mean, who among us hasn't been, entranced, ensorcelled by a building and then, just gotten onto a bus and then and then wandered around the city.
I think they said for like 7 hours he was missing
Oh yeah, that's
in the
insane.
movie. So
He really
that,
must have been like hoofing it, you know.
yeah. And I know things were different, pre cell phone and everything, but yeah, that's a long time to know that you're supposed to be somewhere and then just not be there.
Yeah, when he finally turns up, she says on the phone call like, "He's here and he's sober." Like they're so surprised that he didn't get blackout drunk. Like that was probably just the default.
Yeah. Just
Well,
expectations were not high.
Kale, as a lawyer, like what is it about this movie that you feel that really like kind of like resonates with you today? Like how does this sort of like hold up in your opinion? I guess we can get into
Um,
the story a little bit as well.
First and foremost, it's kind of a shock at how civically literate this guy is. He's essentially like the equivalent of a Boy Scout troop leader, I guess, by trade. I guess that was something he could make money at. And, they kind of paint him as this bright eyed and bushy tailed, naive patriot. And to some extent he was, but at the same time, he was able to like cite Abraham Lincoln, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson by heart. And he was so moved by the entirety of the position that he was given. So, like, they appoint him to be a senator, and he is fully aware of the weight and responsibility that should come with that position that I think politicians are just not
Mm,
aware of now, or just don't care, I guess. But he is fully aware of the public trust that's being placed in him. Also, there are small children that are able to read the Gettysburg Address. well.
Yeah.
They don't stumble over words, so there's that part, I guess. But yeah, I think it's the honestly the civic awareness and literacy and the civic mindedness of the average person portrayed in this movie, as opposed to what we have today, which is a lot of folks who know literally nothing about how the law or the Constitution works. Kind of towards the end of the movie, he's schooling the United States Senate on the Constitution,
Hmm.
and reading parts to them, and that's kind of his big, climactic monologue towards the end is essentially giving the Senate and the audience a civics lesson. Um, and especially coming from somebody who's portrayed and presented throughout the movie as like a rube, that's heartening to
Right.
see that somebody that actually cares. He takes the time and effort to learn about what he's doing. uh, he cares about what he's doing, and he's made a point to be uh, informed about his government and law and the way that things work in this country.
How much of that do you think is the movie's age? Like, do you think this is like a picture of a specific time when when the sort of like group feeling of America was that we did have a lot more respect or high-minded ideals of of how the Senate should be run or how Congress should be run, or how much do you think that is like the character? Because I kind of saw it as like, oh, this is a time when like the idea of a politician being corrupt was kind of shocking, or the idea of corruption in politics was a little scandalous. And this movie, when it came out, it did sort of offend some people, or even maybe shock some people. The idea of corruption within a large group of congressmen or politicians. But I'm curious kind of what your reaction was to that.
I feel like we should point out real quick, it's loosely based off of a real senator from, I believe, Montana,
Oh, okay.
who investigated the Warren G. Harding administration for the what's called the Teapot Dome scandal, which was a corruption scandal in the 20s. Um, so I'm sure it offended sensibilities, because that's just kind of how movies do sometimes.
Mhm.
But at the same time, it was not like a new phenomenon. I think it was just bringing it more into the public eye.
Well, I was also thinking about how the fact that now we have cameras in these rooms, in these meeting halls. We have pretty much every meeting is televised. Pretty much everything is, immediate information is kind of like known almost to the minute. And a big plot point of this film is that they are controlling the narrative of what's happening within this courtroom. Um, so I was kind of wondering like how you see that sort of change, or how, or what was your sort of like thoughts on that? Is this like a picture of a different time, or is this kind of like nothing much has changed?
I think it's a both and. So yeah, the significant plot point about the business tycoon owning all of the newspapers, I believe in South Dakota is where he's supposed to be from in the movie. Um, or at least a majority of the newspapers, and then having a significant workforce where he can just have his cronies go and steal the other newspapers that he doesn't own, so as to prevent their reporting from getting out into the public. But I think that is one of the better aspects of this film, and I think it presents a question that we still don't have the answer to, which is um, about folks controlling the narrative,
Hmm.
misinforming with harmful or malicious intent, and then what to do about that misinformation and disinformation. And it's something that we're obviously still dealing with
Right.
because of social media, and it's different in that it's a lot more real time. It's a lot quicker, like you said. Um, But at the same time, it's the same kind of deal where the story is written by the people who control the writings.
Hmm.
Um, and there's one of the better thing, it's social media is a double-edged sword. One of the better things about it is that it democratizes that process. So anybody can write anything, but at the same time, anybody can write anything. So we don't have to worry about, business tycoons controlling all of the media, even though they do, um,
I don't know
as
what you're talking about.
much. Pay us, Daddy Disney. Um, but uh, even though major corporations do own a majority of the media, there's still the ability for independent journalists to have their voice out there and to have followings and to break stories. And that's something that wasn't quite as prevalent back then. Um, Although I will say the flip side of that plot point in that movie is that they use the like boy rangers or whatever they are,
Hmm.
their little newsletter to actually report the true story and try
Right.
to disseminate that out into the public. I think the big thing is kind of it's I don't want to say optimistic, but I think it's painting a picture of what they thought America and Americans should be and should care about. At one point in the movie, they make a point to note that there are ambassadors from foreign dictatorships, and this movie, is from 1939, so it's very aware of what's going on in Italy and Germany and Spain. Um, and it said specifically like there are foreign dignitaries in the audience. Let's show them how democracy works.
Hmm.
And I think that is a message that we kind of still need. We still need to see how democracy is supposed to work. We still need people in that audience to see that, even though arguably right now it's not working at all. um, but there's I think where there's the idea, there's hope. Which
Hmm.
I guess kind of the plot of V for Vendetta, but realistically, it's true. Where the idea exists that democracy can prevail, there's hope that it can prevail.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely felt a lot of emotions watching this film. I mean, it takes you on a roller coaster ride of kind of righteous anger to to hope, as you said, like with Jimmy Stewart's character really inspiring you, to feeling that uh, what a lot of I feel like older films do a lot of times is they really like take you out on the high note where things like the dam essentially breaks open completely, and Jimmy Stewart doesn't even wake up from fainting before the credits start rolling, and you're out of there.
It's
Um,
funny that you use the dam metaphor because that's the corruption scandal is about a dam.
wasn't even didn't even mean to do that, but yeah. So I think it's significant that Frank Capra um, is an immigrant. He's someone who, as a child, immigrated to America and becomes a film director, and then makes this film. And a lot of his films sort of build um, this idea of America. He really sort of adds his sensibilities of or his like beliefs of what America should be or what America is. It's a Wonderful Life, is another film that's also directed by Frank Capra, which is filled with very sort of like similar American ideals or American hopes and dreams. Um, how does this movie make you feel? Like this movie made me feel a lot of things, but you said there was a little bit of hope in there, but what do you get out of this movie?
I would agree with. I mean, honestly, what you're saying, like, I think the biggest thing that I get out of this is it's very easy these days to be cynical about the entire idea of America, like the great experiment that is this country. Um, we it honestly feels like we're watching it crumble in real time. Um, and that movie made me feel hope. That the idea of what America is supposed to be, and I will also sidebar real quick. The fact that there's an entire line of his speech about every race, color, creed, nationality being
Mhm.
welcome in America again in 1939, pre civil rights and everything was pretty fantastic. But uh, yeah, just like it gave me a sense of there could be something to have pride in this country. It's even though it's hard right now to do that. Um, it's one of those where you have a hero that inspires you because they're good at sports, so they're really kind, or they do some heroic act. And I think Mr. Smith is kind of the hero because he genuinely believes in the American ideal. And in a day and age of political cynicism, of you know just being used to politicians lying to get what they want, or trying to create false narratives in order to spread division, or um, advance political policies that are adverse to the majority of Americans. It's nice to see, and it was inspiring to see, um, even if it is just in a movie, a portrayal of somebody who, you know, to a large extent understands what America is supposed to be, why he cares about it, and then seeing him sacrificing pretty much everything, given he is scapegoated pretty hardcore.
Mhm.
Uh, so it's also a little self defense on his part, but still, like he works himself to the point of passing out from exhaustion, trying to bring that same perspective to his colleagues in the Senate. Um, and even though it took 7 hours or however long, I guess maybe it was overnight, towards the end, like he had been there all night. Like his perseverance and persistence in the face of this overwhelming, uh, like the long arm of the law, or the full weight of the federal government against him. Essentially, he persevered, and then at the end, um, all he had to do was change one person's mind, and that one person kind of started the dominoes.
Mm.
Fortunately, that one person was the bad guy. That doesn't happen often, that you change the bad guy's
Yeah.
mind.
It's true. Well, we're talking kind of about Claude Rains' character, who is, a senator from the same state, who gets him there essentially from the beginning, and then he finds out. I thought it was interesting. The senator kind of learns after he appoints him that he has this past relationship with his father. That there's a connection there, and they sort of make that connection um, early on, and they have that conversation about his father and believing in lost causes. And I really remember the last 10 minutes of this movie. That's I hadn't seen this movie in years, but what I really remembered was this sort of speech towards the end. But what I forgot about was that connection with what they were talking about earlier in the film about lost causes, and how he does end up kind of breaking him and changing his mind. Is he has that there's a great shot of Jimmy Stewart when he finally makes that connection and says, "I guess this is just another lost cause, Mr. Payne," and you realize he's referencing their conversation from earlier in the film, and it's just, oh, it makes it so much it makes it so much more impactful. Um, but yeah, it's his Claude Rains' character is interesting because he is someone who used to believe in, or at least claims he used to believe in those ideals, and has fallen into the machine, into uh, the corrupt machine. And I Sadly, though, cynically, I did kind of look over at my wife when he storms in, breaks, and said that's the most unrealistic part of the movie.
Um, can I just want to point out he was apparently like best friends with Mr. Smith's dad, and just no recollection whatsoever of
Yeah, that's pretty
dude
cold.
having kids.
Yeah.
Just that was like okay, so
I
he
mean,
was
I guess
besties.
I was guessing he hadn't seen him in, like probably 20 years. And, Smith is a very common name,
That that is true. That is
much like
fair.
Anderson.
That is fair. Um, but yeah, and there is a he has an interesting kind of little monologue where Mr. Smith is trying to call him out on
Hmm.
his corruption, and t- is trying to justify it by saying like
Right.
this is how things get done.
Hmm.
This is why I'm still in the position I'm in. This is how I've gotten to do the things that I've gotten to do with this position is by making these, moral, ethical, legal concessions. Um,
Which I'm sure is an argument that a lot of politicians to this day still make with themselves. Of like, well, you gotta
100%.
have this is how you gotta do it. This is how you play the game.
And there's a lot of the, this is how the sausage is made kind of
Hmm.
justification for it. And then Mr. Smith just confronts that. And I had forgotten to talk about the lost cause thing, but that was a part that really stuck with me too. Is when they had that conversation about Mr. Smith's dad. I can't remember what they. Oh, he was a reporter, and I guess his entire shtick with his newspaper was that he reported on like scandals. He tried to hold truth to power, or speak truth to power, and hold power accountable. Um, and it ended up with him being shot in the back, which is, in the scheme of this movie, one of the more like, whoa,
Right.
that's heavy.
Right. Once
Um,
you've seen the film, you're like foreshadowing.
yes, yeah. Uh, and then, the that that look at Jimmy Stewart as he says, I guess this is just another lost cause because they had talked about his dad just believing in lost causes and essentially becoming a lost cause when he refused to, after being threatened, he had refused to not report what he was going to report, and it ended up with him being murdered. Um, that, I mean, yeah, like there, it was heavy, that
Hmm.
that part hurt, especially in light of a current scenario in which somebody who was trying to speak truth to power was deported without any due process recently. But that's the scary part. But then the fact that there was a Jefferson Smith who would still stand up at the end and say, I'm fighting for lost causes,
Hmm.
because somebody needs to, like not everybody can just be cynical all the time.
Yeah.
I wish that I wasn't. But
Well, maybe we need more nepo babies in politics. We need more people who have connections, familial connections with the older corrupt politicians.
yeah, that sounds like a fix. Um,
or we just need our politicians to go around and punch everybody who writes slanderous material about them in the paper.
that too. That
I
was a
I
fun.
completely forgot about that scene, and that is wild. That scene is
Yes,
wild.
yes, I loved that scene. It's a montage of him just punching folks in the face.
Like, and he's going around town doing this, like multiple different locations, like 8 different people. Like that must have taken him hours. You got to track all those people down.
For real. And like, how did he track them down? And then just punch them all in the face.
Yeah, I'm just imagining, today a scenario where Bernie Sanders just goes on a tirade and just starts decking people. And would he still have a career after that? I don't know. Hope so.
I think by and large that's a little more frowned upon in today's society. But that being said, we did have a case in, oh gosh, I can't remember what year, but where the representative from Alaska pulled out a Bowie knife on the Speaker of the House and pinned him up against the wall in the Capitol hallway
Jeez.
with the Bowie knife to his throat. So, we've come far, but also we haven't.
Speaking of that, I think it's an interesting way that the press are sort of framed in this film because they're kind of made to be just as cynical or just be another part of the machine. How do you feel about? I guess how do you feel about that?
Yeah, and I would have to look it up. I can't remember when the Fairness Doctrine was introduced, which, by the way, we should bring back the Fairness Doctrine. Yeah, that was a thing, like a really big thing with the real William Randolph Hearst of the world and those types, where they would, wield the power of the press as a political sword. But at the same time, the power of the press in this movie as well is what enables what the whole conflict even is,
Hmm.
essentially. It's, you know, trying to disseminate information. For Mr. Smith, it's trying to disseminate the information surrounding the corruption scandal, the with the building of the dam. Um, and then with the antagonist, it's the preventing correct information from being disseminated. And it does a good job, I think, of pointing out the both sides of that, because there are reporters who at the very beginning are, making Mr. Smith out to be this, wet
Country
behind the
bumpkin,
ears country bumpkin that has a lot to say to Washington.
right? Yeah.
Even though they're misquoting him and kind of creating this caricature of him in the press. And then even as they're being wielded in, his home state by the business tycoon, the press is still there furiously writing down what is going on, and they're monitoring every step of his entire process, and at some points even helping him,
Hmm.
specifically Diz, I think is his name, Diz.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um, Even though that, he has his own motivations with the love interest and whatnot. But uh, it is a good look and kind of mirror at the power of the press.
Hmm.
It's the power of information, and it's the power of disseminating that information, whether it's true or not. Um, and then there's some talk about reporter ethics or journalistic ethics, which kind of became more serious later on down the road, I think. Mr. Smith d- has no chance when he's going into the Senate because of the press and their portrayal of him, and he also has no chance without the press,
Hmm.
of saving, his legacy, his namesake, or his name, his position in the Senate.
Yeah, they
Um,
almost they almost open his eyes at the beginning of the film because their whole motivation of doing this is basically to highlight the fact that he is a patsy, that he has been hired to, uh, you know, be a stooge, and he doesn't even realize that. So, in sort of their own ways of defaming him, they open his eyes to what's really going on.
and it's interesting. I also just need to appreciate how optimistic this movie was about people's abilities to throw together political parades and rallies in apparently, an hour.
Yeah, it's insane.
Because there's like montages of all these political parades and
Hmm.
rallies with signs that are made and all kinds of stuff. And this is only supposed to be happening like over the course of 24 hours, or
Right.
the climax of the film is, or whatever. But yeah, I think it's a good survey of kind of the power of the press and the importance of that in the political process, um, and how much it shapes the public's view of everything. The power really is in the pen in that movie, and I think it does a good job of pointing that out. And then, you know, at various points, the power is wielded by various people, but um, at the end of the day, it was just something that they had to learn to like live with and to deal with and to utilize.
Who's the person controlling it? The sort of boss.
Oh, James Taylor.
James Taylor, which is funny.
Yes.
I kept saying throughout the movie that damn James Taylor and his fire and rain.
I made the same joke.
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, James Taylor is definitely going to some legal action needs to be taken of the fact that I think he killed a car full of children, like towards the end of the film. I
Oh
mean, that
yeah,
was it
no.
was crazy.
Yeah, they just kind of brushed over that part where his cronies were just straight up beating children in the streets and then running them off the road and like
Setting
running
fire
them over
hoses
with,
on them.
yeah, just crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Absolutely insane.
But sometimes that happens. I keep a special tally mark of old movies that make me yell out "Holy!"
I feel like Frank Capra, that might have just been something he also wanted to portray, was how ridiculous some of the stuff that people in power do, because
Yeah,
that's my biggest complaint with It's a Wonderful Life too, is that Mr. Potter wins essentially and just nobody seems to care. But he's the big,
yeah.
moneyed interest, and he's allowed to
Mhm.
just steal and keep and no repercussions whatsoever.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think this movie doesn't happen without a certain level of cynicism to at least acknowledge that these things actually happen, or that these things, like often these people do win. So I think as optimistic as I think, or idealistic as I think sometimes Frank Capra's movies get painted as, there's a lot of cynicism in them and a lot of harsh reality in them. It's a Wonderful Life is essentially a movie about suicide.
Yeah.
But you mentioned early on that you think this movie should be like mandatory watching. So what is it specifically do you think, or why do you think this movie should be mandatory for for people to see?
I think we exist in a time and context in which we need um, an idealistic political hero. Like, we don't have superheroes, but we have real life supervillains. I mean, we have, essentially a comic book supervillain running the country right now, an unelected richest man in the world with crazy technology and just hordes of cronies doing whatever he wants. But we don't really have a superhero. And I think this movie does a good job of presenting a character who is in a lot of ways the everyman, but he's a character who lives strongly by ideals, who is driven by um, true patriotism and not just nationalism, but like a real love for his country and want for it to be better, as opposed to just a superficial "my country is the, the be all end all." But he truly believes in what America is supposed to be, and he lives that out. Like, he makes that his entire goal. And essentially, he's a superhero whose superpower is to believe in things and not be corrupted by the massive political forces surrounding him. Like, he's just existing in that context in a way that I think is really difficult for people. Um, and again, it's a movie, but he's the hero that we need in a time like now where people are just so scared or so cynical or just feel like they have no power. His sole power is the power of the idea, and he wields it to the best of his ability. And even though it's a lost cause at some point, like, he's still willing to do that.
Okay, I think we're winding down. Anything else you wanted to mention, talk about with this movie?
Watch it.
All right, well, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington can be viewed pretty much anywhere you rent movies from, online or other. If you go to the local library, I bet you can find this film. We love old movies, and I'm sure you do too if you're listening to this. You can reach out to us online and email us at classiccinemasocietypod@gmail.com. please let us know what you thought of this movie. Or if you haven't watched it and you're just curious, go check it out. Guest, Kale, is there anything you'd like to promote?
Watch this movie and vote, because local politics is just as important as national. And even if you don't have a say in national politics, you do have a say in the things that directly affect your everyday life. So go vote.
I concur. Go vote. Make sure you subscribe and share this podcast. One of the best ways to help us is to leave a 5-star review. It's really the best way to help us reach more classic movie nerds like you. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.